Okay, here we go.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber here in beautiful Thunderbird School of Global Management. You can see behind me our last Global Semiconductor Forum. Our next one is February of 2024. So since the last one was so amazing, I strongly recommend you consider attending, not just for the summit, but for the post-summit in the Japanese Friendship Garden, which was probably one of the best things we've ever done as a chamber. It was really extraordinary. The second best thing we've ever done probably is inviting Janine to speak. Because she's amazing and she has a topic that's near and dear to us, to all of us, right? Because the job market right now is just crazy. You know, you hear all this stuff on the news about recession and this and that. Well, guess what? There's more jobs, more people, or more jobs to people. That ratio is amazing. It's horrific for employers because there's just not enough people to fill roles. And part of the issue is also people got this idea that they can work wherever they want to. And so
that's a crazy idea.
Well, what a concept, right? So suddenly, you know, employers like have to treat people properly and provide them packages that make sense. And so there's all sorts of things involved with that. And so we're going to delve into that today. Janine Hamner Holman, she's an international speaker, an expert. She probably can change a tire like I did earlier today. She's a Renaissance woman. And so she's going to provide some guidance for executives who are struggling with this. And I think all of us are. So Janine, thank you for taking the time today to share more. And so I think what we'll do is you have some information to share. You have some PowerPoint even, then you'll come back and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you've got some questions, please put them in the chat. If you're watching this on the video and you'd like to get a hold of Janine, likely during the session, she'll be sharing her contact information, but always info@globalchamber.org. We'll be happy to connect you. Janine, the floor is yours. Thank you for educating us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Doug. I'm so happy to be here. And this is a topic that is so interesting because we are in a time that is really unlike any other. I was talking to an organization the other day, and I said, in many ways, it feels like that perfect storm. We've got a number of different things that are all coming together at the same time that is creating a very difficult environment for employers. So as Doug was mentioning, there are more people, there are more jobs right now than there are people to fill them. There's about 1.7 is the last figure that I heard, 1.7 jobs for every person looking for a job, which means that we have a really, it is a employees market. And so what that means is that a number of different things are shifting, and this is happening against the backdrop of a number of conditions that I'll get into a little bit. So we've got really significant population and demographic shifts that have happened. We have all been living through the COVID pandemic, which has had a lot of impacts on the world of work. And then we've got things like DEI and Me Too and Black Lives Matter and sort of social and political movements. And so all of these things are coming together in this perfect storm that's making it hard for organizations to recruit and retain the top talent. And so if we sort of break down each one of those things, currently the millennials and the Gen Zs, these are the youngest workers in the workforce. So right now, the millennials are 42 years old. the oldest millennials. And I don't know about you, but a lot of shade has been thrown on the millennials for some of the ways that they behave and the things that they expect. Here's the problem. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but the millennials and the Gen Zs coming up behind them, depending upon who you ask, somewhere between 2025 and 2030, which is soon, y'all, 2025 and 2030, they're going to be 75% of the workforce, because the Gen Xers and the boomers, we are phasing out of the workforce. The boomers right now are only about 10% of the workforce. I am the very youngest boomer. I was born in 1964, so you don't have to do any math. I'm 58. So we are retiring. And so this means that what these folks are wanting is actually becoming the norm. And if we don't get on board with it, we're going to have an even harder time in this competitive market. And then we have our friend COVID. And COVID has had a really profound impact on the world of work. It has created a whole new conversation on working from home, working from anywhere. Many people have moved more than 50 miles away from their quote unquote job site during this time. And in part because people had, especially in the early days of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown, a lot of people had time to really think about, what do I want work to be, and what's the place I want work to have in my life, and re-examining things like work-life balance, which I often refer to as work-life harmony, because there's never going to be balance, but harmony feels like a more achievable kind of concept. So work-life harmony and re-examining priorities. And then we have things like the Me Too movement and what's happened around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, often referred to as DEI or DEI and B. And we think really of DEI as something that has taken hold largely in the last 5 or 10 years, and that really hit a tipping point in 2022, in May of 2022, with the murder of George Floyd. And DEI has really been around since the 1960s and the 1970s and the emergence of the equal employment opportunity laws, but it was then very limited in scope. So here's the other thing that's happening, is that over the last 20 years, people have been quitting their jobs, not being laid off, not being fired, not retiring, but quitting their jobs at an average rate of about 2.5 million people. This is in the US, but these figures hold true throughout the world. At a rate of about 2.5 million people a year. And then we hit this thing called the Great Resignation, or the Great Reshuffling, or however we want to frame it. And it's being called that because the numbers shot up. So the highest it had ever been was a little over 3.5 million people in 1 month quitting their job. We are now at a sustained level of about 4 million people quitting their job, and we've been there for 2 years. So at a sustained level of 4 million people quitting their jobs, and got up to 4.5 million. So we went from an average of 2.5 million to an average of 4 million people a month, and as high as 4.5 million people a month quitting their jobs. And so, what is going on here? And in part, it really has to do with this demographic shift, the fact that the millennials and the Gen Zs coming up after them they are now the majority of the workforce. That tipping point happened in about 1999, that they 2000 math, 2019. That's the right word. 2019 is when the tipping point happened, when they became the majority, when the younger folks, 42 and younger, became the majority in the workplace. The oldest of the Gen Zs are now 26. And so this is the future of work. And the thing that's really different about these generations is that they don't have the same fear that the Gen Zs and the boomers and the greatest generation have all had around. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was working for somebody else, I went out on my own about 6.5 years ago. My parents just drilled into my head, don't ever quit your job unless you have another job lined up. Like, a job is security, a job is safety. These younger folks, they do not have that same construct. They grew up in a time of social media. They grew up in a time of side hustles. They have complete faith and confidence in themselves, sometimes like a little too much, like I just graduated from college and I'm ready to take over your Fortune 200 company. And you know, the flip side of that level of confidence is they are 100% sure, and they're proving themselves right, that they can leave your job if it's not giving them what they want and find something else. Or this is the most entrepreneurial generations of folks. 50% of them assume at some point in their life they will own their own business. I never had a plan to own my own business. It just sort of is how things evolved, but it was not my intent. The other thing that's going on in all of this, and we are here towards the end of May, if you're watching the recording of it later. We were recording this in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And there's some really important stuff going on around mental health that I believe we get to now turn that page and normalize things around mental health. So if I fell down and I broke my elbow, I might feel like a klutz, but I don't have any shame about falling down and breaking my elbow. I tore my knee skiing when I was 25 and had to have the whole thing, and then I had to have the whole thing replaced when I was 45. I don't have anything about that. Like, it's a structural thing. Why is it then that we have stigmatized things around mental health? And we are now living in a world where a lot of people are dealing with mental health issues. And COVID was not very helpful to us in this domain. So before COVID, pre-pandemic, worldwide, about 15% of people were dealing with depression at a level at which they really needed help and support. Maybe they needed drugs, maybe they needed talk therapy. They needed intervention at some level. And worldwide, about 29%, so almost 30% of people had been dealing with anxiety at that same level where they needed help and support. Here's the thing. Now, those levels have more than doubled and in some cases tripled. We are now living in a world where almost 41%, 40.7% of people are dealing with depression at a level that they need help, support, and intervention. And 72% of people are living in a world where, or are living with anxiety at a level at which they need help and support. So obviously there's some overlap between these two numbers, but what that means is that it's really likely when we're managing people, when we're helping to support people, that they may be dealing with some level of anxiety and or depression. We're also working in this world where burnout, something that wasn't really talked about that much, burnout has now been classified by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. So listen to this. It used to be, if I was feeling burned out, if I was feeling stressed, if I was feeling anxious, my boss might say to me, well, take a day off, or in today's world, have you checked out this app that can help you manage your feelings and emotions? What's now happened is that the World Health Organization has said, this is not a me problem. This is a we problem. This is happening because of our organizations, because of the level at which we are being called upon at work. And COVID accelerated that. So managers, bosses, CEOs, C-suite folks, when we were in a position where we had to send everybody home in March of 2000, bosses were freaking out because, like, how can we trust our people that they're really going to do work and we're not going to be able to watch them? Here's the thing. People were working more. People are working more now than they have ever before. The problem is we are still at only just slightly under 20% worldwide of people who are fully engaged at work, which means that 80% of your people, they may be working hard, but they're not fully engaged. All right, so what's the difference then between working hard and being fully engaged? So fully engaged is about, I'm excited to be here. I feel like I belong. I am energized by what we are up to. I feel loyal to my organization. I would recommend that a friend, my child, my parent come to work here because it's so great. That's what fully engaged looks like. 80% of our people are not that. And when we are fully engaged, we have a whole different level of connection to our work. We have a whole different level of innovation that is available to us. We have a whole different level of camaraderie. So if somebody needs help, I am going to be really likely, if I am fully engaged at work, I'm going to be really likely to want to step in or figure out how to step in. I was talking with a woman yesterday about a volunteer opportunity that she really wanted me to take advantage of. And she said, well, how much time do you have available? And I said, Deborah, I have no time available. The question is, how much time will I make available? We're all busy people doing all kinds of things. And we are not necessarily always, if we tell the truth, we're not necessarily always using our time effectively. And so when we are fully engaged at work, we are using our time effectively. And so we've got more time available for things like creativity and innovation and thinking outside the box. Here's a really interesting statistic. So MIT did a global study about a year ago, looking at what was driving resignation in organizations. The number one thing that they came up with was this clump of things. It has about 20 different things in it, called toxic organizational culture. And toxic organizational culture is 10.4 times more important to people who are quitting their jobs than compensation. So not salary, compensation. So including benefits, including bonuses, including a new hire bonus, including all of the things. 10.4 times more important than compensation, toxic organizational culture. So then what's inside toxic organizational culture? So there are 6 things inside toxic organizational culture. The first thing, far and away, like 35% of the things inside toxic organizational culture are related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the first time, the other ones, in case you're wondering, the other ones are disrespect, not being listened to, organizations doing things that are unethical, cutthroat, dog eat dog kind of atmosphere that people are being forced in that case to work inside of, and actually abusive things happening. So toxic organizational cultures, inattention to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, disrespect, not being listened to, organizations doing things that are unethical, cutthroat, and abusive. So then if diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is 35% of that whole collection of things, obviously it significantly outweighs any of the other 5. And it begs a question of like, well, why? Why is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging something that is having people leave their organization? Here's why. Again, because of the fact that the millennials and the Gen Zs are very soon going to be 75% of our workforce. These are the generations that have a really strong commitment to things like equity, to things like having a diverse organization, seeing people who are like me. The millennials are even less driven by diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging than are the Gen Zers coming up behind them. Again, these guys right now, the oldest of them are only 26. So as a generation, there's not yet that many of them in the workforce as a percentage. And they are the most diverse generation that we have ever had. So in the United States, this is the first generation ever that the majority of them do not identify as white. They identify as something different. And so diversity, having diverse groups of people and having diverse groups of people in positions of leadership is becoming more important than ever. So then what do we do about that? I have a client that is a financial services company, and they had a retreat last week. And they hired somebody to come in and do a 2.5-hour session with leadership on diversity. And unfortunately, it was a train wreck. The woman who was leading it came in to a room of almost, I mean, this is a financial services company, almost exclusively, like 90% white men, and started beating them over the head with the fact that they were the problem and they were bad people. And this is, unfortunately, it's a lot of the work that we have done around diversity is work that makes people feel bad. When I tell people that I do work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, often they do some sort of like, oh God, that sounds awful. Because so many people's experiences have been like my financial services company's experience was, where for 2.5 hours, they were made to feel like they're bad, like they're the problem, like they need to have shame about it. My belief is that is entirely the wrong way to be going about things. And the opportunity is, instead of sort of hitting people with diversity, how about if we come in first through the inclusion and belonging door? So if I'm an organization and I'm realizing, okay, gosh, I gotta do some things really differently because we are in this perfect storm and in this high competition for talent, I have to figure out how to do some things differently here. And so what if we start thinking about, if we were a more diverse organization, how would we need to be so that if I am a 7-foot-tall, transgender, Black woman from the barrio who never finished high school and is a veteran, how would I feel coming into your organization? And because if we can do that work first, if we can set the conditions so that it's great for me as a 7-foot-tall transgender Black woman from the barrio to come into your organization, then it's likely that I'm going to stick around. Because here's the other thing that has happened, is that organizations have said, okay, we need to do something on this diversity thing. So HR, go get us some people who are different from the norm, whatever that might look like in your organization. Go HR, and HR goes, and they get us people who are differently abled or on the neurodifferent scale, or people who are gay or Black or Latino or of different religions or differently abled, or whatever, all the different boxes, women, all the different boxes that we put ourselves and other people into. And those people come and they look around and they see very few, if any, people like them in your organization, and none in a position of power. And maybe it's not that great for them to be in your organization, and so they leave. And then you say, well, this diversity thing, it just doesn't work here. What if we go in through the inclusion and belonging door first? Because inclusion is about everybody. Inclusion is about everybody feeling welcome at the table, everybody feeling like they belong, everybody feeling like they have a voice. So I'm going to pause here and check in. I've been talking for about 20, 25 minutes and see if we have any questions. Doug, do we have any questions?
We do. Yeah, thank you. And I love the way you've laid all of that out. I've been furiously taking notes and made, probably 20 key points that you pulled together, how you were able to kind of bring that all together. And I just was thinking, just like in the last 2 minutes of as you pulled this together, that we're in a time, as you actually said this right in the beginning, we're at a very unique time in work history. And I think you buttoned it up by talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as, a controversial thing. And it feels like even as anything with change, right, there's always people who are fighting it.
Yeah.
And this whole anti-woke concept, which is, wow, this world is changing and I reject it and I'm getting off. But fundamentally, especially as you mentioned with the millennials and the Gen Zs and also the diversity when we're talking about the US, right? These are things that aren't changing. These are realities. These are things that, hey, you either face the reality or you don't. And there's that group of people way far on the hating change idea that are fighting it.
Yep.
Good luck with that. It's just not going to work, right? The rest of us are rational and real and saying, look, the demographics are changing, the workforce is changing. And I would add another layer that these things are making it possible to do bigger and better things at work.
That's
you
right.
can be more innovative. You can have more impact if you tap into these. And so is that an appropriate response to what you just said?
It is a completely appropriate response to what I just said. And thank you so much. And, part of what is so hard, as you were pointing to, like human beings, we don't like change. I mean, there are a few outliers that do, but most of us, we don't like change. Yeah. And I remember when Steven Spielberg's revisioning of West Side Story came out. I went to the theater and saw it actually with my parents. And it was holiday time. I was back east with my parents. And I remember being really struck in a way that I hadn't been struck by the original about how hard it is for people to change, because most of what's happening in that movie is about the fact that there have been demographic shifts in the neighborhood. And so the folks that used to belong in that neighborhood are now feeling pushed out. They're now feeling isolated. Yeah. And, when we feel pushed out, isolated, like we don't matter, like things that are fundamental to us are being pushed aside, we fight. And so that's a big part of what's happening. And in terms of sort of the backlash and the resistance is A, it's human nature, and B, things that felt safe and secure to the folks in power or who just looked like the folks in power are being threatened. Yeah. And human beings, when we feel threatened, we push back. And unfortunately, we are also, politically, we are in a time where people are really motivated and being motivated, being intentionally motivated through fear. And
isn't that a lot like we need to do something? And so what levers do we have to pull? Well, let's, it's too difficult just to go out and protest because, I'm too busy. So let's do something in politics. Let's start legislating rules that stop this, this progress. Like they're taking us over. They're, geez, where I don't know where it ends, but it's certainly
Right.
somewhat entertaining unless you're negatively impacted by this. And there are millions of people who are negatively impacted on a daily basis by this fear, this craziness, and people being killed with guns, you know, because that's another thing they can do, right? Is like the really, really fringe people can go out and like shoot someone to stop it, you know, but
Right.
hey, you know, it's not going to stop. And this is historical, right? This has happened over thousands of years where people suddenly realized that things were getting out of control relative to their controlled system, and suddenly off they go.
And it is there are a lot of things right now that feel threatening if we want to let them feel threatening. On the other side, our opportunity, I was listening to a woman of color the other day talking about diversity. And she said, so if you are a person who has privilege, and I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my parents made a big deal about the fact that because I happened to be white, because I happened to be born in the US, because I was being well educated, neither of my parents came from any money at all, but my dad did well at work. And so he had access to some measure of money, and therefore I did as well as his child. That all of that meant that I have privilege. That I'm talking to you right now on a computer means that I have privilege. And so what she was saying was, because I have privilege, because we have privilege, are we supposed to feel bad? She said, absolutely not. We are not supposed to feel bad if we have privilege. And if we have privilege, are we called to help make the table bigger for those people who maybe have different kinds of privilege, different kinds of life experiences, or less privilege than we do? Are we called to make the table bigger? Yes, we are.
Yeah, and plus it's good business, right? It's like all the things you laid out there from a business perspective, unless you create a culture that creates belonging, unless you bring in a diverse workforce, unless you do all these things, you're not going to retain people to keep the business going. You know, it's very practical and very simple. And ultimately, even the laggards will get it, right? Because they'll be, you know, kind of forced to get it, and the rest of us will be able to benefit in the meantime because we get it. I'd like to shift, if you don't mind, to like, what do we do about it, you as an executive? And one of the things that I just started to get an epiphany on relative to, at least in my work career, was the 80s for me were, you know, I started on a typewriter, even in college in the 70s. And then the automation time with personal computers was the 80s. When I finally had one at work in 1985, that was like transformational in a good way. And then ultimately it became that way. Then 10 years later, in the mid 90s, I remember we did an event or a meeting within the DuPont company where we were explaining that people now needed to do their own typing and do their own emailing and allow women to be in the workforce. And that was like a big deal for some people. They were rejecting it. It was crazy. So that was like the mid 90s. I don't know what happened in between, but in the early 20s, like you're saying, right now, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and with COVID, you know, we're on the cusp of something phenomenal, because we also have technology like artificial intelligence and Chat GPT and global. I'm going to throw in global.
Right.
Well, in my own mind, I'm thinking, okay, the early 20s are all of the things you've talked about. The second 20s will be all these technologies and global coming together to get to the next level of transformation at a speed we've never seen before. And hopefully, I don't think that's probably a leap, because it feels from what you've explained here that we are on the cusp of something phenomenal. So what do we do about it?
So the reality is that organizations that are more diverse, so just that, organizations that are more diverse are 35% more profitable So says McKinsey. So McKinsey is like the organization that measures that kind of stuff. An attorney the other day, I said that, an attorney said, well, who says? Said McKinsey says. So McKinsey says that organizations that are more diverse are 35% more profitable, and top line profitable and bottom line profitable. So EBITDA, 35% more profitable. So then if we want to also be thinking about the belonging part, the inclusion part, the engaged at work part, there's two key things that we get to transform. The first is our relationship to failure. I don't know about you, but I hate to fail. Again, this is one of those things. Human beings, we don't like failing. We don't like change. We don't like failing. And failure and mistakes are a part of what it is to be human. And there are well-known organizations that have set up cultures to help celebrate failure. And what they mean is, like, it's not like great when we're producing work that is shoddy, that is not well thought out. What they're talking about is that when we are pushing the boundaries, when we are thinking outside the box, when we are innovating, we don't always come up with the next iPhone. Sometimes we come up with, you know, the BlackBerry, which didn't stay around for very long. And so we get to transform our relationship to failure. Lainey, I see you have your hand up, please.
Oh, great. What do you think, Lainey?
Well, it's an important, really important point. And one thing the US is known for is, in general, an accepting attitude about failure. And someone I know translated the word failure to me to be first attempt in learning. And if you can think about failure from that aspect, then you get that excitement about fail fast, fail forward. So I just wanted to share that first attempt in learning idea, because I think you're right that changing the attitude about what it means to fail, redefining that, is at the core of moving forward.
I love that. My acronym is failure always invites learning. So, like, whatever it is for you, whatever resonates with you, we get to transform that. In order to do that, we've got to have what is this concept, which is called psychological safety. This is a term that was coined by Amy Edmondson out of the Harvard Business School. And what psychological safety is ultimately about is the knowing that if I raise my hand, if I ask a question, if I challenge an assumption that maybe we've been working on for a while, that is not only good, I am expected to do it, and there's not going to be a negative repercussion of it. And again, I don't know about you, but that's not the world of work that I came up in. And, you know, we have some horrific examples of what happens when psychological safety is not present. So Dr. Edmondson started her research around this in hospitals. And what she was looking at was the rates of mortality, the rates of people dying, if nurses did not feel safe to speak up to doctors about what was happening. And, you know, one of the things that I know about medical culture is that it tends to be very hierarchical. And so it was often not safe for nurses to speak up in an emergency room or in an operating room. And there could be catastrophic consequences of that. In the debriefing that happened after the NASA Challenger explosion in the 1980s, one of the things that they found out was that there were many engineers who knew that the O-rings on the Challenger were going to fail because they could not withstand extreme cold. And one of the few things I know about space is that it's cold. So they knew that there could be something catastrophic that happened. And in fact, there was, and all of the astronauts on board perished, but they could not raise their hand because there was psychological danger, because it was not safe. They might get fired, they might get shamed, they might get demoted if they did. And so we cannot have an atmosphere where failing is normalized, where mistakes are normalized, where we become a learning organization if we don't have psychological safety. They are concepts that are embedded in one another. And so, there's all kinds of books, there's practitioners, including me, that can help you figure out how do I create psychological safety in my organization. The easiest place to start is with listening. So listening is a fundamental concept inside trust. And trust is what you need for psychological safety and for to become an organization that embodies learning, where you understand that failure and mistakes are a part of the learning process. You don't want to make the same mistakes twice, and you want to learn from them. And so when we embrace listening as the way into trust, it's the way into belonging. Listening is one of these funny words that many of us have collapsed the idea of listening and hearing. Hearing, unless I am hearing impaired, hearing is just something that happens. It is a biological function. It's one of the 5 senses. It just happens. Right now I'm sitting here, I can hear the sound of my own voice. I have a fan over there. There's street noise. I hear stuff. Listening is a skill. When we listen, we are being intentional about it. We are quieting that voice in our head that has lots of things to say and lots of judgments about ourselves and everybody else in the world. That's a constant chatter. And we are calming that down and paying attention to what the person across from us is talking about. In order to do that, we have to give up this idea of multitasking. I am working with an organization right now and working with their leadership group. And I gave them a challenge. It's like, at least once in the next week, I want you to just pay attention, just be present for an hour on whatever it is that's happening on a Zoom, to the person who's sitting in front of you, whatever it is. And they freaked out. Like, I won't be able to get my work done. There's going to be so many messages on Slack, like how, And what they're finding is, of course, that they can. I mean, people treat us the way that we teach them to treat us. People treat us the way that we allow them to. When we set up the conditions that say, I will always respond to you immediately, we have set up those conditions. And so they are finding that by just being focused on whatever it is, and so now, of course, they are expanding that amount of time that they are doing and trying to do it every day. And it is countercultural in many organizations. It's countercultural to us as humans. We have a big myth that human beings can multitask. We even have another myth, which is women are better at multitasking than men. Here's the thing, y'all. It's all nonsense. If I wasn't being a good girl, I would say a different word. It's nonsense. The human brain cannot multitask. So unless you are a computer, you cannot multitask. What you're doing is you're just switching really quickly between one thing and another thing. You're paying attention to here and then you're on your phone. You're paying attention to here and then you're writing a note. You're paying attention to here and then you're thinking about your grocery list. You're doing one thing and then another thing. The problem is the more that we do it, the worse we get at whatever it is that we're doing. So check this out. According to the folks at the Harvard Business Review, the more we try to multitask, the more our IQ goes down by as much as 10 points because we can't do it. We're trying to force our brain to do something that it cannot do. And so we're switching really quickly between one thing and another thing, and we make more mistakes. And then we train our brain to switch really quickly between one thing and another thing, and it has an impact on our actual intelligence. So knock it off. And if what we're doing is really working on listening, you can't listen well and do something else at the same time. It's my mother's perpetual complaint about her husband. You just can't.
That's a great advertisement for Positive Intelligence, PQ, which is a member of Global Chamber, and I recommend everyone go through that because it harkens to all the points that you mentioned there, to be able to clear your brain, to be able to be in the moment, to be able to actually listen. Because multitasking, part of it is different activities, but even if you think you're listening, your brain could be somewhere else, right? And working on different things. And so quieting that part is just so essential. And a great way to do that is through positive intelligence. We only have a couple minutes left. And so I'm wondering if you don't mind, could you summarize, or maybe just make some closing comments, perhaps is a better thing to do in terms of, certainly give us your contact information and how we get a hold of you, but also what would you like to leave us with?
So hopefully there is my contact information. Am I sharing the screen?
Yep, you got it.
And so where I'm going to leave you is that if it feels like you are at an unprecedented time and having a harder time than you have ever had with recruiting and retaining the right people, it's because you are. It's because we are. We are in it with you. And the best place to start is with where we just were, is with listening, actively listening. And as Doug was talking about, positive intelligence. And one of the things that I love about positive intelligence is there's a website that I think is just called positiveintelligence.org. You can certainly Google it. You can take a free assessment. .com. Thank you. Yep. It's a free assessment. And then you get information and tools. Like we just don't give away that much stuff anymore. And so you can go there, you can find it out, you can learn about what is driving you in the workplace and what is driving your people. Another easy place to start is actually with appreciation. I was talking with a client and they were talking about, they were at a networking event and somebody who reported to them was there and their boss was there. And she had such a great time telling her boss about how great her employee was doing. She was like, it felt so good. And I said, that's great. Do it more. And ask your people, how do they like to be appreciated? Because some folks would love it if their boss's boss knows what a great job they're doing. Other folks, that would make them want to crawl into the cement. And so we get to ask our people, how would they like to be appreciated? And then get about the business of doing that.
I love that. That's fantastic. Janine Hamner is an extraordinary leader and expert in this area. We really appreciate you sharing this information today. If you'd like to get a hold of Janine, you saw her contact information there. Follow her on LinkedIn. Check out the expertise that she shares there as well. And then just, have a chat. Take some time off. Put everything aside, don't multitask, and just ask some questions and learn and advance your business and advance yourself further. Thank you, Janine. You're extraordinary.
Thank you so much, Doug. I so appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone.
And thank you, Janine. This was a terrific session. Thank you so much. Always
You're so
listening
welcome.
to what you have to share.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Lainey.
Take care. Janine Hamner Holman. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.